part of today's lesson, we're going to have a look at how we can use the cosine rule to find a missing side. So again, a bit like we've done with the sine rule and with our half AB sine C for area of a triangle, the labelling of a triangle is still the same for this one. So it needs to be capital letters on angles and lowercase letters on sides. But we do need to make sure that we label certain angles in certain ways. So we'll go through that with you. Okay, it's important to recognise for this particular triangle, we can't use the sine rule. If you think about the formula for sine rule, we had lowercase a, all right, which would be this side here, over sine A, so we'd need a pair. We'd then need lowercase b, which is this one, over sine B, again a pair, okay, and lowercase c over capital sine C. And again, we don't have the pairs that we would have with the sine rule. So if we started filling in our formula, there would be too many gaps and we wouldn't have one thing that we can just disregard. So at that point, we don't have opposite pairs and therefore it's not our sine rule. Could we use Pythagoras' theorem? No, that is used for a right-angled triangle. This is again a formula for a non-right-angled triangle, so it's a much higher grade than it would be for Pythagoras to be able to find a missing side. Okay, so instead, this is where we can use our cosine rule. When it comes to using the cosine rule, we have to be very careful with how we label the triangle. The reason being, our formula is a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cos of capital A. So within this formula, there is one capital letter, hence one angle, and that's the one we need to label with A. So we need to make sure the angle that we know or the angle that we're trying to find is always labeled with capital A. B and C then don't matter, and our lowercase letters need to be on the opposite side. So in this case, we would need to make sure this one's lower little b and this one's little c. Okay, we can then start trying to use the formula. Our starting way to do this is to substitute the values into our actual equation. So we've got a squared is equal to 4 squared plus 3 squared minus 2 lots of 4 times by 3 times by cos of 80. We can then start to simplify that as much as possible. So our 4 squared gives us 16, our 3 squared gives us 9, and our 2 times 4 times 3 gives us the 24. It's important at this point to highlight the fact that the 24 and the cos 80 do in fact go together, and we should not be doing 16 plus 9 take away 24, because by BibMaths, the 24 times cos 80 is the higher level operation that we would do first. You can, in fact, at this point, stick it into your calculator in one go. So do 16 plus 9 minus 24 times cos 80, and you would get an answer. That's absolutely fine. My maths wants us to do an extra couple of steps. Okay, so the 24 times cos 80 comes out at 4.16. Remember, you should not be rounding at this point. You keep the full answer on your calculator. You can then do 16 plus 9 minus your answer button. So you've got the full calculator display in there, and you would get an answer of 20.83. Remember, the 20.83 up here doesn't seem like a sensible answer for that length. We can't draw a triangle that's sort of 20.8 long by 3 and then 4. So we've got to do that last step, which is to square root it so that we get a final answer. It is the most common thing that people forget when using the cosine rule, but an answer of 4.56 seems far more logical than for BC. Right, I'm going to go through one more example with you, but at this point, if you want to pause and have a go, by all means do, and hit play when you're ready for me to go through it with you. Right then, if we start by filling in our values, so our b squared is going to be 8 squared plus 7 squared minus 2 times 8 times 7 times cos of 44. So we would need to make sure that we've labelled our 44 down here as our capital A to help us work out our missing side x. We would then need to try and simplify that as much as possible. So our 8 squared is going to give us 64. Our 7 squared is going to give us 49. Our 2 times 8 times 7 will give us 112. So we can tidy it up like that one. Again, we can then work out our next step. So our 64 added to our 49 will give us 113. And the second bit wants us to do the 112 times cos of 44, which comes out at 80.5660, etc. Now, for the purposes of my maths, because it can't handle me putting in all the digits, it is allowing me to round it. but you should not do this. You need to be using the answer button on your calculator, so make sure that you are not rounding until the very end of the question. You now want to do your 113, take away your answer button, so that you are getting, again, an accurate answer. So mine is 32.43394, etc. So if I do round it, just again for the purposes of my math to be able to cope with it, we get the 32.4. And then your last step at that point is to square root, and again use your answer button so that you can get it nice and accurate. So we're going to square root that, and I get 5.695, etc. So to one decimal place, I get 5.7. That's my final answer. So hopefully that helps you. But remember, with all of these types of calculations, you should never round until you get to the very end of your answer. Right, just a quick recap then on how we know when to use the cosine rule. So a good way to remember is if we think about it, is we need a side, an angle, and a side. That comes from the actual formula, because we've got two sides here, the b squared and the c squared, okay, and one angle cos A, and that A is always sandwiched between B and C.